By midnight, Miami Harbor looked like a polished postcard. The water reflected gold and blue lights from luxury yachts lined up like trophies. Music drifted across the bay. Laughter followed it. Everything smelled of salt, champagne, and money. On the upper deck of a $10 million yacht, the Wellington family was celebrating the way they always did. Private, exclusive, untouchable. Victoria Wellington stood near the rail, a crystal flute in her hand. Her silver hair was flawless, her white linen dress pressed within an inch of perfection. She lifted her glass slightly higher than the others, as if the night itself belonged to her. "To another successful year," she said calmly. Applause followed, polite, controlled. Beside her, Ethan Wellington smiled when he was expected to. He wore a tailored navy jacket, sleeves rolled just enough to look relaxed. To anyone watching, he was the image of privilege made effortless. But inside, something felt off. It always did lately. The knees. Countdown echoed from nearby boats. 10, 9, 8. Fireworks cracked in the distance, premature and impatient. Then the light changed. At first, it was subtle. A shadow slid across the deck, swallowing the glow from the harbor lights. The music from their yacht faltered as crew members turned instinctively toward the water. Someone frowned. Someone else stepped closer to the rail. A vessel was approaching, slowly, deliberately. Not just any yacht, it was enormous, towering, easily 3 times the size of theirs, a floating city of steel and glass moving with quiet confidence, as if it had every right to be there. The chatter died. "Is that docking next to us?" someone whispered. Victoria's lips tightened. "They can't be serious." The mega yacht glided closer, blotting out the skyline. Its lights came on one by one, illuminating decks, a pool, a helipad, the kind of ship people read about but rarely saw this close. As it turned, the name on its hull became visible. Destiny! The word stretched across the side in bold black letters. Ethan's breath caught. For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest felt suddenly tight, like a memory pressing from the inside. The yacht settled beside them with practiced ease. Lines were thrown. The water between the 2 vessels went still. Silence fell over the Wellington deck. Then a woman appeared. She stepped onto the upper deck of the mega yacht, framed by light. She was tall, composed, unmistakably black. Her presence didn't announce itself loudly. It didn't need to. She wore a simple black evening dress that spoke more of power than decoration ever could. At her side stood 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. All 3 wore tailored nautical outfits, crisp and expensive. They leaned against the rail casually, like they belonged there, like the world had always made space for them. Ethan stared. Their faces were unfamiliar. Their eyes were not. Blue, clear, unmistakable. "Mom," Ethan murmured, without realizing it. "Do you see that?" Victoria had gone still. Her champagne glass trembled in her fingers. "Who are they?" Ethan's wife asked, confused, uneasy. The woman on the other yacht looked down then. Her gaze moved slowly, deliberately, until it landed on Ethan. She did not smile. She did not look surprised. It was as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She leaned down slightly toward the children and said something quietly. The kids straightened. The boy on the left lifted his hand and waved, grinning. "Hi, Dad." The girl followed, her voice bright and clear, cutting through the harbor noise. "Happy New Year, Grandma." For a split second, no one breathed. The glass slipped from Victoria Wellington's hand and shattered on the deck. Ethan felt the world tilt. His ears rang. The sound of fireworks exploded overhead, but he heard none of it. The 3rd child spoke last, softer than the others, almost careful. "Hi, Dad." Ethan's knees locked. His heart slammed so hard it hurt. "That's not possible," someone whispered behind him. Victoria grabbed the rail, her knuckles white, her face drained of color. For the first time in decades, she looked small. The woman on the mega yacht finally spoke. Her voice calm, steady, carrying easily across the short distance between them. "Hello, Victoria." Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving the children. Memories he didn't know how to name clawed their way to the surface. A life that had been sealed shut. A silence that suddenly made sense. The harbor erupted into cheers as midnight hit. Fireworks lit up the sky. But on the Wellington yacht, no one celebrated. because something buried years ago had just risen from the water, and it had come back not quietly, not humbly. It had come back with a name, a legacy, and a debt that could no longer be ignored. Before everything collapsed, before names became weapons and silence turned into damage, Naomi Carter believed in something simple. If she stayed quiet, stayed kind, stayed grateful, the world would eventually make room for her. Naomi was 24, black, and tired in the way only people who never get a break understand. She worked double shifts at a waterfront restaurant in Boston, the kind of place tourists loved and locals with money pretended was casual. White tablecloths, fresh seafood, tips that depended on smiles more than effort. She lived in a small apartment in Dorchester with her mother, Lorraine Carter, who had raised Naomi alone since Naomi was 6. No degree, no savings, just discipline, faith, and the belief that working hard without complaining meant something. Ethan Wellington entered Naomi's life quietly. He did not announce who he was. He did not wear his wealth loudly. The first time he sat in her section, he ordered iced tea, not wine. He said thank you. He looked her in the eyes. He came back the next night. Then again. Eventually, Naomi noticed he always asked for her section. They started talking in fragments, small jokes, long looks, careful curiosity. When he finally asked her out, he did not choose Beacon Hill or anywhere near his world. He suggested coffee across the river, Cambridge, neutral ground. That should have been the first sign. Ethan was 29, the only son of a real estate dynasty that shaped entire blocks of Boston. He worked for the family firm, wore responsibility like a tailored coat, and spoke about his future as if it were already written. But with Naomi, he felt like a person again. They dated quietly, secretly. No social media, no photos, no dinners near his family home, beaches outside the city, empty parks, restaurants where no one knew his last name. Naomi never pushed. She told herself love did not need witnesses. Ethan told himself time would fix everything. "My mom isn't evil," he said once, lying beside her in the dark. "She just needs to see that I'm serious, that I'm doing things the right way." Naomi nodded, even when her stomach tightened. "If I don't ask for anything," she said softly, "she won't have a reason to hate me." They believed these things because they needed to. The illusion worked until it didn't. The night Naomi realized she was pregnant, she sat on the edge of the bathtub for nearly an hour, the test resting in her palm like a verdict. Her hands shook. Her mouth felt dry. She did not think about money first. She thought about Ethan's face, about the way he hesitated whenever his phone buzzed with his mother's name. When she told him, they were sitting on a bench near the harbor, the wind sharp with early spring cold. "I need to tell you something," Naomi said, her voice barely steady. Ethan smiled automatically. "You're scaring me." She handed him the test. His smile disappeared. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he pulled her into his arms so tightly, she could feel his heartbeat racing. "We'll figure it out," he said quickly. "I promise." She cried against his chest, relief and fear tangled together. "I'll tell my mother," he said. "Tonight." Naomi looked up at him then. He was holding her. He was saying the right words, but his eyes were already somewhere else. There was fear there, not of becoming a father, fear of losing his place in a world that had never asked him to choose before. Her friend Maya said it bluntly when Naomi told her later that night. "They're not afraid you're poor," Maya said, folding her arms. "They're afraid you exist." Naomi laughed weakly, brushing it off. Ethan would do the right thing. He always had. That was the lie they both carried forward into the dark. Ethan left for Chicago on a gray Tuesday morning, carrying a leather briefcase and the weight of expectations he had never learned how to refuse. "It's just 3 days," he told Naomi at the airport, his arms wrapped around her a little too tightly. "I'll talk to her when I get back if I have to. This trip is mandatory, board stuff." Naomi nodded, even though her chest felt hollow. "I'll be here," she said. "Be careful." Ethan kissed her forehead, then hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he turned and walked away. Naomi watched until he disappeared into the security line, reminding herself that this was what trust looked like. That afternoon, her phone rang while she was folding napkins at the restaurant. "Naomi Carter," the voice asked. Calm, female, polite in a way that did not invite questions. "Yes." My name is Margaret. I work for Victoria Wellington. Mrs. Wellington would like to meet with you tomorrow afternoon. She believes it's time you spoke face to face. Naomi's heart jumped. She wants to meet me, she asked, surprised by the hope in her own voice. Yes, at her residence. I'll text you the address. The call ended before Naomi could ask anything else. For the rest of her shift, her hands shook. Maybe this was it. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe if his mother saw her in person, saw that she wasn't reckless or greedy or loud, everything would calm down. The Wellington house sat behind iron gates in Brookline, quiet and immaculate. Naomi arrived early wearing the nicest dress she owned, borrowed from her friend Maya. It fit her just well enough to feel confident and just tight enough to remind her she did not belong here. Victoria Wellington was already seated when Naomi was shown into the sitting room. Pearls at her throat, black blazer composed like she had been waiting for this moment all her life. Sit, Victoria said gently, gesturing to the chair across from her. Naomi sat. They studied each other in silence. Naomi noticed how clean the room felt, not cozy, controlled. You're younger than I expected, Victoria said at last. Naomi forced a small smile. I get that a lot. Victoria nodded. Ethan tells me you're pregnant. Naomi's stomach tightened. Yes. Victoria reached for a folder on the table beside her and opened it without emotion. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the glass surface toward Naomi. It was a check. $100,000. Naomi stared at it, confused. Her ears rang. Take this, Victoria said calmly. Leave the city. Naomi looked up slowly. I don't understand. My son will never know you, Victoria continued, her voice level. Or that baby. There was no anger in her tone, no insult, no threat spoken aloud. That was what made it terrifying. I love your son, Naomi said, her voice trembling despite herself. I never planned this. I didn't trap him. I didn't ask for anything. Victoria folded her hands. Love is not a plan, and this situation is not sustainable. You are alone. You have no legal protection, no leverage, no support system that can withstand pressure. Naomi swallowed hard. I'm not trying to hurt him, she said. I just want to exist. Victoria's eyes hardened slightly. That is precisely the problem. The room felt smaller. Naomi thought of her mother's tired hands, of Ethan on the phone with his mother, voice careful and rehearsed, of Maya's warning echoing in her chest. She looked down at the check again. This wasn't money. It was a door being quietly closed behind her. What happens if I say no? Naomi asked. Victoria met her gaze without blinking. Then you will discover how expensive resistance can be. Naomi's breath caught. She was pregnant, alone, 24. No lawyer, no power, no safety net. She picked up the check, not because she wanted it, but because she understood exactly how easily someone like her could be erased. When she stood to leave, Victoria nodded once, satisfied. Naomi did not look back as she walked out. By nightfall, she would begin disappearing. Naomi walked out of the Wellington house into the late afternoon, cold, her breath shallow, her legs moving on instinct rather than choice. The iron gates closed behind her with a soft mechanical sound, polite and final. The check was folded inside her coat pocket. She could feel its weight with every step, like something alive, pressing against her ribs. On the bus ride back to Dorchester, she stared out the window and saw nothing. Neighborhoods passed, storefronts blurred. A group of teenagers laughed loudly in the back, unaware that a life had just been split in 2-3 miles away. Her phone buzzed. Ethan. She let it ring. She knew if she answered, her voice would break. She knew if she heard him say her name, she would stay. And staying was not an option anymore. When she reached her apartment, her mother was at the kitchen table, sorting mail after a long shift. You okay, baby? Lorraine asked, glancing up. Naomi nodded too quickly. I'm tired. She went into the bathroom and locked the door. Only then did she let herself slide down against it, one hand over her stomach, the other shaking as she pulled the check out and unfolded it. $100,000. More money than she had ever held. Less protection than she had ever needed. She cried silently, teeth pressed together, shoulders trembling. Not loud, not dramatic. The kind of crying that comes from understanding exactly how small the margin for error is. That night, she packed. She didn't tell her mother everything, just enough. I need to leave Boston, Naomi said softly. For a while. Lorraine looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Then you leave. We'll figure the rest out." They hugged for a long time. No questions. No pressure. Naomi booked a one-way ticket under a different address. She quit her job by voicemail. She turned off her phone. At the airport, as dawn crept into the sky, she rested both hands on her belly and whispered a promise. "I won't let them erase us." When the plane lifted off, Boston fell away beneath her. So did Ethan. So did the life she had believed would protect her if she behaved correctly. Naomi did not disappear because she was weak. She disappeared because she was learning how to survive. Naomi left Boston before the city woke up. The plane lifted through low clouds, and with it went her name, her routine, her place in someone else's story. She arrived in Austin just after midnight with one suitcase, a prepaid motel room, and a body that no longer felt like it belonged only to her. Texas did not ask questions. It rarely does. She rented a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side, close enough to bus lines, far enough from places that looked like judgment. She paid 3 months up front. She bought prenatal vitamins with cash. She learned which clinics didn't ask too much and which ones looked at her like a problem to be managed. Then came the ultrasound. The technician stared at the screen longer than usual, adjusted the wand, squinted. "Miss Carter," she said carefully, "how many babies were you told you were carrying?" Naomi laughed once, nervous. "1. The technician turned the monitor. 3 heartbeats. Marcus came first, then Elijah, then Ava. Triplets. Naomi sat on a plastic chair afterward, hands pressed to her face, shaking with a soundless panic that felt almost respectful. She did the math in her head. Rent, diapers, formula, time. She did not call Ethan. She did not call Victoria. She called no one. On the day the babies were born, there was no hand to hold, no last name to write next to theirs, just Naomi, exhausted and terrified, whispering their names like anchors as nurses moved efficiently around her. "Marcus," she murmured. "Elijah, Ava." They were small, strong, black, loud. They survived. Back in Boston, Ethan returned from Chicago to silence. Naomi's apartment door opened to emptiness. The dresser drawers were bare, the photos gone, her mug missing from the sink. He stood in the middle of the room, heart racing, calling her name like it might answer back. She never did. He drove straight to his mother's house, panic giving way to fury. "She's gone," he said. "Her place is empty." Victoria didn't look surprised. "She took the money," she replied calmly, "and she left." Ethan stared at her. "What money?" Victoria's voice was smooth. "The money I offered her, to make this easier." Easier for whom was never said. The idea settled into Ethan slowly, like rot. Naomi leaving. Naomi choosing cash over him. Naomi deciding he was disposable. It didn't feel true, but it felt plausible enough to hurt. In Austin, Naomi worked nights and studied days. She took whatever job fit between feedings, call center, cleaning offices, deliveries when her body allowed it. She learned to nap in minutes, to eat standing up, to think in lists. People looked at her and saw what they expected to see. A black woman, 3 babies, no ring. Landlords hesitated. Employers smiled thinly. Advice came uninvited. "You should think about assistance." "You must have made some bad choices." Naomi said thank you and kept moving. At night, when the apartment was finally quiet, she read business articles, finance blogs, anything free and dense. She learned words no one had taught her before. Equity, risk, scale. She did not disappear. She just stopped asking for permission to exist. And somewhere between midnight feedings and sunrise shifts, something in Naomi hardened. They had tried to erase her. Instead, they taught her exactly how the system worked. The first year blurred into survival. Naomi learned the sound of each baby's cry, the way other people learned melodies. Marcus cried sharp and fast when he was hungry. Elijah whimpered before he ever reached full tears. Ava rarely cried at all. She just stared, wide-eyed, as if taking notes. Sleep came in pieces. So did dignity. At grocery stores, strangers stared openly. Some smiled with pity. Some shook their heads. Once, an older woman leaned in and whispered, "That's a lot for someone like you," as if concern could disguise judgment. Naomi said nothing. She paid. She left. Money shrank quickly. Formula was expensive. So were diapers. So were days she had to choose between rest and overtime. The check from Boston became a boundary line, not a comfort. It bought time, nothing more. What it did not buy was safety. When the twins were 6 months old, Naomi applied for a leasing agent position at a small property office. The manager skimmed her resume and smiled thinly. No degree? No. 3 kids? Yes. The man leaned back. We're looking for someone more stable. Naomi nodded, already standing. She had learned not to argue with doors that were never going to open. At night, she studied while the babies slept. She taught herself spreadsheets, watched free lectures, learned how money moved and who decided where it stopped. She didn't dream of wealth. She dreamed of leverage. Across the country, Ethan told himself he was healing. He worked longer hours, let his mother set him up with women who fit better, women who looked right at charity events, women who did not ask questions about the past. But the lie sat heavy in his chest. She chose the money, Victoria repeated whenever he wavered. You were spared a lifetime of regret. Some nights, he almost believed her. Other nights, he didn't. In Austin, Naomi pushed a stroller that could barely fit through doorways. People stared. She stared back. She stopped shrinking. When the babies turned 1, she whispered to them in the dark, a promise she had no proof she could keep. They tried to erase me, she said quietly, but you will never grow up invisible. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, something irreversible had already begun. Naomi learned the truth in layers. First came the shock of 3 heartbeats, then the logistics, then the quiet terror that followed her home and sat beside her every night when the apartment finally went still. Triplets did not just mean more love. They meant 3 times the rent pressure, 3 times the childcare, 3 times the margin for error shrinking down to almost nothing. There was no dramatic collapse, no single moment where everything broke. There was just weight, constant, relentless. Naomi stopped thinking in years. She thought in weeks, in grocery runs, in how long the formula would last, in whether she could afford to miss a shift if one of the babies got sick. When the kids slept, she studied, not out of passion, out of necessity. She borrowed books from the public library, watched free online courses on her phone while folding laundry, learned basic investing terms the way other people learned survival skills. She started small, very small, $50 here, $100 there, index funds, long-term bets, no gambling, no miracles, just discipline. She reached out to local small business groups, asking questions. Most never responded. A few did, politely declining. You're not a good fit for our investor profile. We're looking for accredited partners. You should come back when your situation is more stable. Stable was a word Naomi learned to resent. What they meant was predictable. What they meant was safe. What they meant was not you. Rejection stacked quietly, like bills on the counter. What Naomi did not know was that some doors were being closed before she ever reached them. In Boston, Victoria Wellington had not forgotten her. She never raised her voice, never left fingerprints. She simply asked questions in rooms Naomi would never enter. She's inexperienced. She's unstable. She disappeared once. That tells you everything. A few phone calls, a few carefully worded concerns, enough to stall introductions, enough to cool interest. Victoria told herself she was preventing future problems. She told herself she was protecting her son from embarrassment. She never told herself she was afraid. Meanwhile, Ethan married a woman his mother approved of, a woman with the right education, the right family, the right resume. Their home was quiet, polite, empty. They shared schedules, not thoughts, apologies, not warmth. At night, Ethan lay awake beside someone who barely touched him, wondering how a life could feel so complete on paper and so hollow in reality. She left. His mother reminded him whenever doubt surfaced. You were abandoned. In Austin, Naomi rocked 3 children to sleep and wondered why silence hurt more than hunger ever had. No explanations, no closure, no chance to speak. Just absence. That was the lowest point. Not poverty, not exhaustion, but being erased while still breathing. And somewhere inside that silence, something hardened. If the world was going to ignore her anyway, Naomi decided she would stop waiting for permission to be heard. She would build quietly. And when she finally spoke again, it would be impossible to look away. The hardest nights were the quiet ones. When all 3 children were finally asleep and the apartment hummed with nothing but the refrigerator and distant traffic, Naomi would sit at the small kitchen table and stare at her laptop, hands resting around a cold mug of coffee she never finished. Silence had a sound then, heavy, pressing. She replayed conversations that never happened, words she never got to say, explanations that no one ever asked for. In those moments, the truth settled in deeper than fear. Ethan thought she chose money over him. Victoria believed she had erased a problem, and the world had already decided who Naomi Carter was without ever listening. Some days, the weight showed. At a daycare interview, the woman skimmed Naomi's paperwork and paused at the section marked number of children. 3, she repeated, eyebrows lifting. All the same age? Yes, Naomi said. The woman smiled tightly. We're full. Naomi watched her slide the papers back as if they carried something contagious. At the pediatrician's office, a nurse asked, "Is the father involved?" Naomi answered honestly, "No." The nurse nodded, already moving on, already filing her away. Every system had a place for Naomi. It just wasn't a place of power, so she stopped knocking. She invested quietly, reinvested patiently. She tracked numbers like lifelines. When one small investment paid off, she didn't celebrate. She doubled down. When another failed, she adjusted without emotion. There was no room for ego, only survival. One night, exhausted beyond tears, Naomi whispered into the dark, "I'm still here." Not as a plea, as a statement. Across the country, Ethan signed papers and smiled for photos. His wedding was elegant, expensive, forgettable. His mother cried for appearances. His bride smiled like someone fulfilling a contract. Ethan stood at the altar and felt nothing settle into place. Later, alone, he stared at his phone, scrolling past Naomi's old number, still saved, still unreachable. He never dialed. Pride and confusion wrapped around him too tightly. Both of them believed the same lie, that they had been left behind. Neither knew that silence was not emptiness. It was pressure. And pressure left long enough does not disappear. It transforms. Success did not arrive loudly for Naomi Carter. There were no champagne toasts, no victory speeches, no moment where the room suddenly recognized her worth. It came the way survival always had, quiet, incremental, ruthless in its patience. The first real shift happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning when Naomi opened her laptop after dropping the kids at school. A number stared back at her from the screen. Larger than the last time she checked, larger than it should have been. She refreshed the page. The number stayed. Her hands trembled, not from excitement, but from disbelief. Years of small, disciplined decisions had finally crossed an invisible threshold. What once paid for groceries now paid for freedom. What once barely mattered now moved markets. Naomi had become something the system never expected her to be. Self-made, unattached, unapologetic. By the time Marcus, Elijah, and Ava turned 6, Naomi's name circulated in rooms she would never physically enter. Quiet investor, early backer, ruthless instincts. No interviews, no public profile. Money did not change her posture. It changed her protection. The truth found her on a rainy afternoon in Miami, years after Austin had stopped feeling temporary. She was sitting across from a private investigator named Daniel Ross. A man with tired eyes and a voice that suggested he had learned to speak carefully for a living. "You asked me to look into why certain opportunities stalled," he said, sliding a thin folder across the table. "I didn't expect this." Naomi opened it slowly. Emails, call logs, names she recognized too well. Victoria Wellington. Daniel leaned forward. "She didn't attack you directly. That would have been messy. She asked questions, raised concerns, planted doubts." Naomi's jaw tightened. "She framed it as risk management," he continued. "Unstable background, sudden disappearance, questionable reliability, enough to make people hesitate." Naomi closed the folder. "So she never stopped," Naomi said quietly. "No," Daniel replied. "She just assumed you never noticed." The room felt suddenly still. Naomi thought back to every polite rejection, every opportunity that cooled without explanation, every silence that felt intentional but unprovable. This wasn't about Ethan. It never had been. "She wasn't just trying to keep me away from him," Naomi said, more to herself than to Daniel. "She was trying to erase me." Daniel nodded. And there's something else. He hesitated, then spoke carefully. Ethan Wellington never knew the truth. Not about the money, not about the pregnancy, not about the kids. Naomi looked up sharply. She told him you left for cash. Daniel said that you chose money over him. He believed it. The room tilted. For years, Naomi had lived with the quiet anger of being misunderstood, of being judged by a story she never got to tell. But this shifted something deeper. Ethan hadn't abandoned her. He had been rewritten. Naomi leaned back, exhaling slowly. The realization didn't explode. It settled. Victoria Wellington hadn't just removed Naomi from her son's life. She had attempted to remove Naomi from relevance itself, from credibility, from legacy, from history. Naomi stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Miami moved fast, loud, unforgiving. She thought of her children, of how often the world tried to shrink them before they even spoke. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, controlled, unmistakably present. If they wanted me gone, Naomi said softly, they should have finished the job. Daniel said nothing. Naomi turned back to the table. They tried to erase me, she continued, so I became proof. She picked up the folder, no longer shaking. And now, she said, voice steady, I'm done being invisible. Naomi did not act out of anger. That surprised even her. Anger had carried her for years, fueled her through exhaustion and dismissal, sharpened her instincts when nothing else was left. But what came next required something cleaner. Clarity. She sent Daniel away with a single instruction. Quietly. No ripples yet. Then she sat alone in her office long after the sun went down, lights off, city glowing beneath the windows. Marcus, Elijah, and Ava were asleep upstairs, their backpacks lined neatly by the door for the morning. She thought about what Victoria Wellington had done. Not just the meeting, not just the check, the calls, the doubts planted, the slow suffocation of opportunity. Victoria had not wanted Naomi humiliated. That would have left fingerprints. She wanted Naomi irrelevant. And for a moment, years ago, she had almost succeeded. Naomi picked up her phone and scrolled to a number she had never deleted. Ethan. She stared at the name until the screen dimmed. Then she locked the phone and set it face down. Not yet. This was not about confrontation, not yet. It was about leverage. Over the next few weeks, Naomi moved with intention. She restructured her assets, pulled back from positions that connected too closely to names Victoria could poison. She shifted capital quietly, favoring anonymity over credit. The more she learned, the clearer the pattern became. Victoria didn't destroy people loudly. She erased them slowly, trusting time to finish the job. Naomi smiled once, humorless. Time was no longer on Victoria's side. At dinner one night, Ava looked up from her plate and asked, "Mom, why do people think they can tell other people where they belong?" Naomi paused. "Because they're afraid," she said honestly, "afraid of losing control." Marcus frowned. "Can they tell us where we belong?" Naomi reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "No," she said, "they can try, but belonging isn't something other people get to give or take." Later that night, Naomi stood in her bedroom and opened the safe hidden behind a panel in the wall. Inside were documents, proof, timelines, names, not weapons, receipts. She finally allowed herself one sentence out loud, not whispered, not prayed, but stated like fact. "They wanted me erased." She closed the safe. "I'll make myself unforgettable." Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that a story long suppressed had reached the moment where silence stopped being protection and started becoming evidence. Naomi didn't need to rush. When she returned, it would not be to ask for truth. It would be to deliver it. New Year's Eve returned to Miami Harbor, dressed in lights and noise, the kind of celebration that pretended nothing beneath the surface ever broke. The Wellington yacht sat exactly where it always did, polished and guarded, its guests laughing with the confidence of people who believed the past stayed buried if enough money stood on top of it. Victoria Wellington moved through the deck like a queen inspecting her territory. She smiled when required. She nodded at the right names. Her posture was flawless. This night was supposed to confirm everything she had protected. Then the shadow fell. Conversation slowed as the massive vessel eased into view. Its presence undeniable, its scale impossible to ignore. Crew members on nearby boats paused mid-task. Phones lifted. Music faltered. The name on the hull caught the light. Destiny. Ethan felt it before he understood it. A pressure behind his eyes. A familiar tightness in his chest that had no explanation left. When Naomi appeared on the upper deck, calm and unmoved by the attention, something in him cracked open. She was not the woman he remembered, or maybe she was exactly who she had always been, now unhidden. 3 children stepped forward beside her. They didn't hesitate. They didn't look confused. They looked certain. The first words shattered the night. "Hi, Dad. Happy New Year, Grandma." Ethan dropped his glass. It hit the deck and broke, sharp and loud, cutting through the music and laughter like a verdict. "What did they just say?" someone whispered. Victoria turned slowly, too slowly, her face drained of color as if the blood had decided to leave first. Naomi's voice carried easily across the short distance between the 2 boats. Calm, steady. "I think it's time the truth stops floating in silence." A man stepped forward beside her, dressed simply, holding a thin folder. "Ethan Wellington," he said clearly. "My name is Daniel Ross. With your permission, I'd like to explain why 3 children just claimed you as their father." Ethan could not move. Naomi met his eyes then, and for the first time in years, he saw something familiar there. Not accusation, not bitterness, only fact. "The DNA is confirmed," Daniel continued. "All 3 are your biological children." Ethan's knees buckled. He caught himself on the railing, breath coming too fast, too shallow. Victoria spoke at last, her voice sharp with panic. "This is obscene," she said. "You have no right to do this here." Naomi didn't raise her voice. "You did it here first," she replied. "You just called it protection." Daniel opened the folder and held up a document. 6 years ago, he said, a payment of $100,000 was issued by Victoria Wellington to Naomi Carter. The condition was simple: leave the city, disappear, never tell Ethan Wellington about the pregnancy. A murmur rippled across the deck. Ethan turned toward his mother slowly, disbelief giving way to something far more dangerous. "You told me she chose money," he said. "You told me she left." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Naomi stepped forward. "She didn't just keep me from you," Naomi said. "She kept you from them." The children stood quietly beside her, hands clasped together, watching the man they had waited years to meet fall apart in front of them. The fireworks exploded overhead. No one looked up, because some prices are finally paid in daylight. Ethan's breath came apart in uneven pieces. He looked from Naomi to the children, then back to his mother, as if the truth might rearrange itself if he stared long enough. "You knew," he said quietly. "All this time, you knew." Victoria reached for him out of instinct, not permission. "Ethan, listen to me. I did what I had to do. You were young, confused. That situation would have ruined your future." "My future?" His voice broke, then hardened. "You took 6 years of my life. You took my children," Naomi said. "Nothing. She didn't need to." The damage was speaking for her now. Daniel stepped forward again, measured, professional. "There's more." Mrs. Wellington didn't stop at the payment. Over the years, she made inquiries, calls, quiet interventions that delayed or blocked business opportunities connected to Ms. Carter. A pause. Heavy. She attempted to ensure Ms. Carter never re-established herself in spaces of influence. Victoria shook her head. "That's not how this works. I never touched her directly." "You didn't have to," Daniel replied. "You understood the system well enough to let it do the rest." Ethan closed his eyes. Every doubt he had buried. Every night he told himself the story made sense. It all collapsed inward. Naomi finally spoke again, her voice steady but low. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said. "I came here because my children deserved the truth. They deserved a father who wasn't stolen from them." She looked down at Marcus, Elijah, and Ava. They were erased before they ever spoke. Ava stepped forward then, small but unafraid. "Are you really our dad?" she asked Ethan. He dropped to one knee without thinking. "Yes," he said immediately, tears spilling freely now. "I am, and I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Marcus studied his face carefully. Elijah held his sister's hand. Naomi watched it happen with a tight ache in her chest. This moment didn't heal 6 years, but it mattered. Behind them, Victoria stood frozen. The guests who had once laughed easily now avoided eye contact. Phones were lowered. Whispers traveled fast. The image she had curated for decades cracked in public view. "You wanted control," Naomi said softly, turning back to her. "This is what it costs." Victoria's voice finally faltered. "I was protecting my family." Naomi met her gaze without anger. "So was I." Ethan stood slowly, his face changed by something deeper than shock. "I believed you," he said to his mother. "I built my life around your version of the truth." He shook his head. "And now I have to live with what that cost." The perfect family image dissolved right there on the deck. No shouting, no violence, just the quiet collapse of authority stripped of its lies. As the crowd slowly pulled away, uncertain and unsettled, the fireworks faded into smoke above the harbor. The celebration moved on elsewhere. But for the Wellingtons, the night had already taken everything it came to claim. Naomi did not ask for punishment. That surprised everyone. There were lawyers who offered strategies, quiet settlements, public reckonings that could have ruined reputations permanently. She listened to all of it, then declined. "I don't want revenge," she said simply. "I want the truth to exist where the lie used to live." So that is what she demanded. The truth, on record, responsibility, without excuses, and the right for her children to grow up, knowing who they were and where they came from. Ethan moved to Miami within months. He learned fatherhood the way Naomi had learned survival, one day at a time. He learned how Marcus needed space before trust, how Elijah asked questions when he was scared, how Ava watched everything, storing emotions like secrets until she decided it was safe to speak. He learned how much 6 years cost. Some nights he sat alone after the children slept, staring at photos Naomi had saved for them. First steps he missed, first words, first birthdays. The grief did not ask permission. It arrived anyway. But he stayed. And that mattered. Victoria Wellington learned something far harder. She learned how to apologize without controlling the outcome. Her first apology was awkward, defensive, too polished. Naomi stopped her gently. "Say it like you mean it," she said. "Not like you're managing damage." It took time. Victoria learned that remorse does not restore authority. That forgiveness, when it comes at all, arrives slowly and on terms she does not set. She learned that power cannot repair what fear destroys. The children watched all of it. They asked questions, hard ones, honest ones. "Why did you try to make Mom disappear?" Ava asked once, her voice calm in a way that made adults uncomfortable. Victoria answered without deflection, "Because I was afraid, and because I was wrong." That answer mattered more than any excuse ever could. Marcus, Elijah, and Ava did not grow up angry. They grew up informed. They knew the truth early. They knew the system had tried to decide their worth before they ever spoke. And they knew their mother refused to let that decision stand. Naomi never told them to hate. She taught them to remember. Years later, when her name appeared in business journals and quiet profiles, it was never framed as a comeback. There was nothing to return to. She had built something new, something undeniable. When asked once how she felt about the past, Naomi answered with calm precision, "They tried to erase me. Instead, they gave me clarity." She did not smile. She did not need to, because some attempts to erase a person don't make them disappear. They make them unforgettable.